A homeless kid played a B.B. King song on a guitar held together with electrical tape and made the king of the blues cry in front of everyone. Chicago, 1972. The wind coming off Lake Michigan cut through everything that night. It didn't care about your coat. It didn't care about your plans. It just came through and reminded you that winter in Chicago was never a suggestion. It was a threat. Inside a small blues club on the south side, the air was different. Warm, thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of whiskey and perfume, and something harder to name. Something that lived in every blues club in every city where people came to sit in the dark and let someone else's pain make their own feel a little lighter. The room held maybe 120 people. The tables were close together. The stage wasn't much more than a raised platform with a single spotlight that buzzed when it got too hot. The walls were covered with old concert posters, some peeling at the corners, some held up with thumbtacks that had been there so long they'd rusted into the plaster. And backstage, sitting on a folding chair with Lucille resting across his lap, B.B. King was getting ready to play. Now, if you know anything about B.B. King, you know that by 1972, he was already a living legend. He'd been playing professionally for over 2 decades. He'd recorded dozens of albums. He'd played the biggest stages in America and Europe. His guitar work had influenced an entire generation of musicians. When people talked about the blues, they talked about B.B. King. There was no separating the two. But here's what most people didn't know about B.B. King. Despite all of that success, despite all of that recognition, he never stopped playing the small clubs. He never stopped going back to the places where the blues lived in its rawest, most honest form. He believed that the blues didn't belong to concert halls. The blues belonged to people who needed them. And that night, in that small club on the south side of Chicago, one of those people was about to walk through the door. But he wasn't a paying customer. He wasn't a music critic. He wasn't even old enough to be inside a bar. He was a 14-year-old boy named Marcus. And he was carrying a guitar that looked like it had been rescued from a garbage pile. Before we get deeper into this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone so young do something so honest that it made you question everything you thought you knew about talent, about struggle, about what music actually means? Tell me in the comments. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss what happens next. Trust me. Marcus had been standing outside the club for nearly an hour. He wasn't trying to get in. He knew he couldn't get in. He was 14. He had no money. He had no identification. He had nothing that would convince the large man standing at the door that he belonged inside. But he had a guitar. It was an old Silvertone acoustic, the kind you could buy from a Sears catalog in the 1950s for about $20, except this one hadn't been bought from a catalog. It had been found. Marcus had pulled it from behind a dumpster near his apartment building 3 years earlier when he was 11. The guitar was in terrible shape. The body had a crack running along the lower bout that someone had sealed with electrical tape. 2 of the tuning pegs were replacements that didn't match the originals. The neck was slightly warped. The finish had been worn away in patches, revealing the bare wood underneath. One of the strings was a replacement from a completely different gauge, which meant the guitar never quite sounded balanced. But Marcus played it every single day. He played it on the front steps of his building. He played it in the stairwell when the weather was bad. He played it on the corner of 47th Street, where sometimes people would stop and listen, and occasionally drop a quarter into the open case at his feet. He didn't have a case, actually. He used a cardboard box. That night, Marcus wasn't playing for quarters. He was playing because he'd heard that B.B. King was inside, and B.B. King was the reason Marcus had picked up that broken guitar in the first place. 3 years earlier, Marcus's older brother, Daryl, had owned a small collection of blues records. Daryl was 19 at the time. He worked nights at a warehouse on the west side. During the day, he slept in the bedroom he shared with Marcus and their younger sister. Daryl loved the blues. He had records by Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Albert King, and Bobby Bland. But the record he played more than any other was B.B. King's Live at the Regal. Marcus remembered lying on the floor of their small apartment, listening to that album. He remembered the way B.B. King's guitar seemed to speak, not just play, speak. Every note sounded like a sentence. Every bend sounded like a question. And when B.B. King sang, it sounded like he was talking directly to you, like he understood something about your life that you hadn't figured out how to say yet. Marcus was mesmerized. Then Daryl was killed. It happened on a Tuesday, a robbery gone wrong near the warehouse. Daryl had been walking to the bus stop after his shift. He was 20 years old. Marcus didn't talk for 3 weeks after the funeral. His mother worked 2 jobs. His grandmother watched the younger children. Nobody in the family had time to notice that an 11-year-old boy was slowly disappearing into himself. But then Marcus found the guitar. He didn't know how to play. He didn't know the names of the strings. He didn't know what a chord was. He simply held the instrument and tried to make it sound like the noises he remembered from Daryl's records. It took him months to play anything recognizable. He taught himself by listening. He would play a B.B. King record on Daryl's old turntable, then try to copy what he heard. Over and over, day after day, his fingers bled, his wrists ached. The guitar fought him constantly, buzzing and rattling and refusing to stay in tune. But Marcus didn't stop. Because every time he played, he felt closer to his brother. And now, 3 years later, he was standing outside a blues club in the freezing Chicago night, playing a B.B. King melody on a cracked guitar, hoping that somehow the sound would travel through the walls. The doorman's name was Roosevelt. Everyone called him Rosie. He was a big man with a shaved head and hands that looked like they could crush a telephone book. He'd been working the door at the club for 11 years. He'd seen everything: drunk men, angry women, fights, proposals. He'd watched people walk in heartbroken and leave singing. He'd watched people walk in celebrating and leave in tears. But he had never seen a kid standing outside in the cold playing guitar like his life depended on it. Rosie watched Marcus for about 15 minutes before he said anything. The boy was good, not polished, not technical, but there was something in the way he played that made Rosie stop checking IDs and just listen. Marcus was playing The Thrill Is Gone. Now The Thrill Is Gone is one of the most famous blues songs ever recorded. B.B. King had released it in 1969 and it had become his signature. Every blues musician in the world knew it. Every guitar player had tried to play it. But the way Marcus played, it was different. The cracked guitar gave the melody a rough, broken quality. The mismatched string created an unintentional dissonance that somehow made the song sound sadder. And Marcus's fingers, still developing, still learning, moved with a kind of desperate sincerity that no amount of training could replicate. Rosie walked over to him. "Kid." Marcus looked up, his fingers stopped. "How old are you?" "14. You know you can't come in here." Marcus nodded. "I know." "Then why are you standing out here freezing?" Marcus looked at the door. "B.B. King is in there." Rosie crossed his arms. "Yeah, he is. I just wanted to hear him play." Rosie studied the boy's face. Then he looked at the guitar, the electrical tape, the mismatched tuning pegs, the cardboard box at Marcus's feet with a few coins scattered at the bottom. "Where are your parents?" "My mom's at work." "She know you're here?" Marcus didn't answer. Rosie sighed. He looked back toward the club, then he looked at Marcus. "Wait here." Rosie disappeared inside. Marcus stood alone in the cold. His fingers were numb. He blew on them. Then he started playing again, not because anyone was listening, because playing was the only way he knew how to stay warm. Inside the club, B.B. King was between sets. He was sitting at a small table near the back of the stage, drinking water and talking to his bass player. The crowd was buzzing with conversation. Glasses were clinking. Someone at the bar was laughing too loudly. Rosie approached B.B. King carefully. He leaned down and whispered something. B.B. King looked at him. "A kid." Rosie nodded. 14, standing outside playing your song. B.B. King raised an eyebrow. Which song? The thrill is gone. B.B. King set down his water glass. He studied Rosie's face. He could tell this wasn't a casual observation. Something about the way Rosie said it carried weight. Is he any good? Rosie hesitated. Then he said something that surprised even himself. He sounds like he means it. B.B. King sat with that for a moment. Then he stood up. Show me. Rosie led B.B. King through the club, past the bar, past the crowded tables, toward the front entrance. A few patrons noticed B.B. King walking and tried to get his attention, but he waved them off gently. When they reached the door, Rosie pushed it open. The cold air hit them immediately. And there was Marcus. He was sitting on an overturned milk crate, hunched over his broken guitar, playing. His breath came out in white clouds. His fingers were red from the cold. His jacket was too thin for the weather. His shoes had holes near the toes. But he was playing. And the sound that came from that cracked, taped together, barely functional guitar stopped B.B. King in his tracks. It wasn't technically impressive. The notes weren't clean. The rhythm wavered. But there was something in the phrasing, the way Marcus bent certain notes, the way he paused between phrases, the way he let silence do as much work as sound, that told B.B. King everything he needed to know. This boy wasn't performing. He was grieving. B.B. King had spent his entire career listening to the blues. He understood better than almost anyone alive that the blues wasn't a genre. It was a language, and this boy was speaking it fluently. Marcus hadn't noticed them yet. His eyes were closed. His body was swaying slightly. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere the cold couldn't reach, somewhere the sadness couldn't find him, somewhere the music had built walls around him and made him safe. B.B. King didn't say anything. He just listened. For nearly 3 minutes, one of the greatest blues musicians in history stood in a freezing Chicago doorway and listened to a 14-year-old boy play his song on a guitar that should have been thrown away years ago. Then Marcus opened his eyes. He saw B.B. King. His fingers stopped. His mouth opened, but no words came out. B.B. King smiled. Don't stop on my account. What happened next became one of those stories that people who were there would tell for the rest of their lives. B.B. King looked at Rosie. Let him in. Rosie hesitated. He's 14. B.B. King smiled. I started playing juke joints when I was younger than that. Rosie stepped aside. Marcus walked into the club. The warmth hit him first, then the smell, then the sound of 100 conversations happening at once, then the sight of a real stage with real microphones and real amplifiers and real musicians sitting in real chairs holding real instruments. Marcus had never been inside a blues club before. He followed B.B. King toward the stage. People noticed. Conversations slowed. A few patrons pointed. Who was this kid? Why was B.B. King walking with him? And what was that terrible-looking guitar he was carrying? B.B. King stepped onto the stage. He turned toward the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I found something outside tonight. The crowd quieted. Actually, B.B. King corrected himself. I think something found me. He looked at Marcus. Come on up here. Marcus froze. He looked at the stage. He looked at the audience. He looked at his guitar. Every insecurity he'd ever felt about that instrument came rushing forward. The tape, the cracks, the mismatched strings, the warped neck. He shook his head. B.B. King noticed. He stepped to the edge of the stage and spoke quietly so only Marcus could hear. Son, I played my first gig on a guitar I borrowed from a man who found it in a pawn shop for $2. You know what? It sounded terrible. Marcus looked at him. But it was mine, B.B. King continued, and what came out of it was mine, and nobody could take that away. Marcus swallowed. Now get up here. Marcus climbed onto the stage. The audience stared, some smiled, some looked confused, a few whispered to each other. B.B. King pulled a stool beside his own chair. "Sit down." Marcus sat, his hands were shaking, the guitar rested on his lap like a wounded animal. B.B. King looked at his band. They understood immediately. They'd been playing with B.B. long enough to know when something unscripted was about to happen. B.B. King turned to Marcus. "What's your name?" "Marcus." "Marcus, do you know the thrill is gone?" Marcus almost laughed. "Yes, sir." "Good." B.B. King placed Lucille across his lap. "Then let's play it together." The bass player started first. A low, steady pulse. Then the drummer came in, soft brushes on the snare. The keyboard player laid down a bed of minor chords that filled the room like smoke. B.B. King looked at Marcus and nodded. Marcus placed his fingers on the strings. The first note came out rough. The crack in the guitar's body created a rattling overtone. A few people in the audience winced. But Marcus didn't stop. He played the opening phrase. Slowly, carefully, each note placed with the precision of someone who had practiced this melody 1,000 times in stairwells and on street corners, and in the quiet of an apartment where the absence of a brother's laughter was louder than any music. B.B. King watched Marcus's hands. Then B.B. King began to play. Lucille's voice entered the room like light entering a dark hallway. Clean, warm, effortless. The notes flowed from B.B. King's fingers with a mastery that decades of performance had refined into something almost supernatural. But here was the remarkable thing. B.B. King didn't overpower Marcus. He didn't take over. He played around the boy's melody. He filled the spaces. He responded to Marcus's phrases as if they were having a conversation. Because they were. Marcus would play a phrase, B.B. King would answer. Marcus would bend a note. B.B. King would bend one back. When Marcus paused, B.B. King paused. When Marcus pushed forward, B.B. King followed. The audience realized what was happening. This wasn't a performance. This was a transfer. B.B. King was passing something to this boy, not technique, not knowledge, something deeper, permission. Permission to play with a broken instrument. Permission to play imperfectly. Permission to play with pain and call it music. Marcus reached the vocal section. He didn't sing. He played the melody where the lyrics would have been, and the cracked guitar transformed those familiar words into something raw and unnamed. B.B. King stopped playing. He just listened. The band continued softly beneath Marcus, but B.B. King lowered Lucille and watched. Marcus didn't notice. His eyes were closed again. He was back in that place where the music made him safe, where his brother was still alive, where the world hadn't taken everything and left him with nothing but a broken guitar and a memory. He played the final phrase. The last note hung in the air. Then silence. Complete, absolute, breathless silence. And then the room erupted. People stood, people shouted. People who had spent the entire evening drinking and talking and barely paying attention were on their feet, clapping, some of them crying, some of them shaking their heads in disbelief. Marcus opened his eyes. He looked stunned. He looked at B.B. King. B.B. King was smiling, but his eyes were wet. Where did you learn to play like that? Marcus looked down at the guitar. My brother had your records. Had. He died 2 years ago. The room became quiet again. B.B. King set Lucille aside. He leaned forward. What was his name? Daryl. Daryl. B.B. King repeated the name like it mattered, because it did, and he liked the blues. Marcus nodded. He said the blues was the only music that told the truth. B.B. King closed his eyes for a moment. Your brother was right. After the set, B.B. King took Marcus to the back of the club. They sat at the same small table where B.B. King had been drinking water earlier. The crowd was still buzzing. People kept glancing toward them. B.B. King looked at the guitar. May I? Marcus handed it over. B.B. King turned it carefully in his hands. He examined the electrical tape, the crack, the mismatched pegs, the worn frets. He pressed a finger against the warped neck and felt how the wood had bent over time. "Where did you find this?" "Behind my building, in the trash." B.B. King nodded slowly. He strummed it once. The sound was thin, rattling, imperfect. "You know what most people would have done with this guitar?" Marcus shrugged, thrown it away. "That's right," B.B. King handed it back. "But you didn't." "No, sir." "Why not?" Marcus held the guitar against his chest. "Because it was the only one I had." B.B. King looked at him for a long time. Then he said something Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. The blues was never about having the best instrument. The blues was about having something to say and not being afraid to say it with whatever you've got. Marcus nodded. B.B. King continued, "I've played guitars that cost thousands of dollars, beautiful instruments, perfect sound, but you know what? The best music I ever made was on the worst guitar I ever owned, because I wasn't thinking about how it sounded. I was thinking about what I was trying to say." He pointed at Marcus's guitar. "That thing right there, it sounds like truth. Don't let anybody tell you different." Then B.B. King reached into his jacket. He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "This is the number for my manager. You call him next week. Tell him B.B. sent you." Marcus stared at the card. "Why?" "Because I'm going to get you a guitar, a real one, something you can grow with." Marcus immediately shook his head. "I can't take that." B.B. King laughed, a deep, warm laugh that seemed to come from somewhere ancient. "Boy, I'm not asking." Marcus looked at the card, then at B.B. King, then at his broken guitar. "But what about this one?" B.B. King smiled. "You keep that one too, forever." "Why?" "Because 20 years from now, when someone asks you how you started playing, you're going to hold up that guitar. And the cracks, and the tape, and the scratches are going to tell your story better than any words ever could." Marcus called the number the following week. B.B. King's manager arranged for a new guitar to be delivered to Marcus's apartment. It was a Gibson ES-335 sunburst finish in perfect condition. Inside the case was a handwritten note. It read, "For Marcus, play the truth, B.B." Marcus's mother cried when she saw it. She had never been able to afford an instrument for her son. She had watched him play that broken Silvertone for 3 years, knowing it was the only thing keeping him connected to his brother, knowing it was the only thing keeping him from falling into the same streets that had taken Daryl. Marcus practiced on the Gibson every day, but every night before bed, he picked up the old Silvertone. He'd play a few bars of The Thrill Is Gone, quietly, just for himself, just for Daryl. Over the next several years, Marcus became a fixture on the Chicago blues scene. He played in clubs. He sat in with local bands. He developed a style that musicians described as haunted, a sound that carried a weight most young players couldn't access. And whenever someone asked him about his influences, he always said 2 names: his brother Daryl and B.B. King. Years later, Marcus and B.B. King crossed paths again at a blues festival in Memphis. Marcus was in his 20s by then. He was playing professionally. He had his own band. He was earning a living doing the thing that a broken guitar in a trash pile had introduced him to. B.B. King recognized him immediately. "Marcus, Mr. King." B.B. King looked at the guitar Marcus was carrying. It was the Gibson. "You still have it?" "Of course." "And the other ones?" Marcus smiled. "At home, on my wall." B.B. King nodded. "Good." They played together that night. 2 guitars, 2 generations, 1 language. And somewhere in the crowd, a woman was watching, Marcus's mother. She had driven 4 hours to see her son perform. When the set ended, she found Marcus backstage. She was holding a small frame. Inside the frame was a photograph. It was a picture of Daryl sitting on the steps of their apartment building, holding a record. The record was live at the Regal. Marcus stared at the photograph. He hadn't seen it before. "Where did you get this?" His mother smiled. "I found it in Daryl's things. I've been saving it." Marcus turned the frame over. On the back, in Daryl's handwriting, were 4 words. "This music saves lives." Marcus closed his eyes. He held the photograph against his chest, the same way he used to hold that broken guitar. And for the first time in years, he cried. "Here's what I keep thinking about when I hear this story." B.B. King didn't have to go outside that night. He was a superstar. He could have finished his set, collected his check, and gone back to his hotel. Nobody would have blamed him. Nobody would have known. But he heard something, not just music. He heard something underneath the music. He heard a boy trying to hold on to someone he'd lost. He heard a language he recognized, and he walked toward it. That's what the blues has always been about. Not perfection, not technique, not expensive instruments or sold-out arenas. It's about taking everything you feel, the grief, the joy, the confusion, the longing, and turning it into something that someone else can hear and say, "Yes, I know exactly what that feels like." Marcus didn't have the right guitar. He didn't have the right clothes. He didn't have the right connections. He didn't even have the right to be inside that club. But he had something to say. And that was enough. If this story moved you, I need you to do something. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever kept an object, a guitar, a watch, a photograph, anything, not because it was valuable, but because it connected you to someone you lost? Tell me about it. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe that talent isn't about what you have, but about what you're willing to say with it, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because somewhere out there right now, there's a kid on a street corner playing a cracked guitar. And maybe, just maybe, the right person is about to walk through that door.